say it one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, as Senator Booker said, we're going to have a more intimate gathering. Those of you in the back are more than welcome to come forward. My name is Blair Smith, and I have the privilege of being the Special Projects Advisor for the National Action Network, focusing on financial services and diversity in the pension plan space. It is a real honor for us to all be here today. We want to thank both Reverend Sharpton and Senator Booker for their time and for their contribution to making all of these efforts successful. So we're going to keep things going at a pretty rapid pace. So without further ado, the Honorable Cory Booker.
So I'm not going to use the microphone. I'm very excited to get out of the way and bring forward somebody who has been an inspiration to me for a long time. Has been a partner, has been a friend. But I want to really put two things out there real quick. The first is I would be remiss if I did not use every moment of time I have now and next week to just sound the alarm. We are in a state of crisis in our country as the Republican health care bill now gains momentum. We were able to stop version after version of Trump care, and right now, seeing what I've seen and talking to the folks I've talked to in the last, in fact, Saturday afternoon, I get a call from Senator Chuck Schumer just saying, you know, we've got to do everything we can to awaken people to the reality. This version of the health care bill, interestingly, takes a lot of the worst elements of the other bills that fail and packs them all into one. And so not only does it have an attack on Planned Parenthood, which in many counties throughout the country is the sole provider of contraceptive care, not to mention one of the critical providers of preventative care for millions of Americans. Not only does it do that, but also it's actually not even just rolling back the Affordable Care Act. It is changing Medicaid as we know it. It's taking Medicaid, this over 50-year-old program, and just gutting it, which will mean that millions of Americans will lose their health coverage, the most vulnerable in our country. It's going to take a savage battle axe at the protections that now Americans on both sides of the aisle desperately want, and that's the essential health benefits, access to maternity care, access to mental health care, as well as taking the battle axe to something that is almost unconscionable that should go on in this country where insurers can discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. And so we are all here because of a tradition of protest. It's literally in the First Amendment, guaranteeing the ability to petition your government. If you are silent in this time, if you have not taken an action or 2 or 10 to wake people up, if you're not calling Congress or posting on this issue on your social media, you are contributing to what could be the reality is that by 2020, we not only have eroded the gains of the Affordable Care Act, but we've gone back to having more Americans lose insurance coverage, more Americans not having that security. And please understand, I'm looking at this data. When coverage rates go down in America, mortality rates go up. And who is most affected by those mortality rates when they go up? It is low-income people, people of color. So please, this is a moral moment for our country. Would you please take some action between now and next week to get folk woke to this issue? Can I get an amen? I just got to hug this brother because I'm getting ready to run for Senate. He just knows me as a mayor, and I'm getting ready to run for the Senate. And he's like, hey, Cory, did you know that of the billions and billions of dollars being managed, public pensions being managed in Washington, D.C., by the federal government, I should say, that none of those dollars are being managed by women-run firms or minority firms. None. And I'm like, wait a minute. We've got red states like Texas, purple states like Ohio, blue states like New York, who have emerging manager programs. You know, New York is like almost 9% of their money is being managed by emerging managers. I just couldn't believe it. I just said, this man is lying to me. I may even call him a liar to his face.
Wouldn't be first.
It wouldn't be first. But I come to find out when I get elected here that even though these are funds being contributed to the majority by women, being contributed to the majority significantly by people of color, none of the money is being managed by emerging firms. The brother was telling the truth. And so immediately in 2014, I got elected in 2013, I led a letter to my colleagues to our president, to our African-American president, and just said there's something seriously wrong here. Next thing you know, a few months later, we have a summit meeting in the White House where we had 3 cabinet secretaries sitting around talking about the issue, and we kept working this issue, held a summit between the people that run these funds and emerging managers, eventually got a very small, and I'm going to admit this to you, what I think is an anemic first step, and this is in the right direction, a step of having a pilot program to do something about it. But the problem is that these funds, I brought my data with me, every study that I've been able to find about the performance of these managers shows that women and minorities firms, emerging managers, actually outperform the folks that are managing our money. According to a Barclays study, Barclays Capital, it said that women and minority-owned funds outperform the broader firm universe over a 5-year period that they had analyzed. Specifically, over that 5-year period, the Barclays study showed that certain women and minority-owned funds generated a cumulative return of 82% compared to non-diverse firms of about 51%. Now, that's very impressive data. And what you see is that we're doing things that bias against smaller firms, against emerging managers, and really towards others. And so as I get ready to pass this off to the Reverend Sharpton, what I've really appreciated about his leadership is that we have to understand this country. And I literally just had a conversation with the President Trump's nominee that he had at NASA. And you have to understand that every nominee I have, I discuss my issues, we talk a lot about climate science, but I immediately also, I make sure that I shift and discuss issues of diversity itself. And this was sort of a stunning juxtaposition to me because the meeting I had before that was with HBCU college presidents. I have an HBCU legacy. My grandparents went to HBCUs, my parents went to HBCUs. I am here because of these organizations, these institutions that serve about 3% of this college students in America, but they produce between 20 and 25% of the black college graduates in America. And then you keep going along the pipeline to people in the tech fields, people in graduate schools. It's this pipeline that is so precious. And as I sat there with the NASA administrator, I said that, look, you have got to use your position, should you get there, should you be confirmed, to start focusing on the problem we have in this country, that we're leaving our talent on the sidelines and not creating a fair playing field that's not just about competition amongst each other, but is a global competition right now. There's too much of our greatest natural resource, which is the genius of in a global knowledge-based society. The greatest natural resource a country has is the genius of its people. And we're not allowing that genius to proliferate and have a chance to compete at the table. And worse than this, we have a history, and I'm not talking about the 1800s only, a history going up until the present day of overt discrimination holding back the talent and the genius of our country. Now, when they did land grants and railroads, women and minorities weren't even allowed at the table to get those benefits. When government was creating generational wealth in this country, the TV stations, when they were first dividing up that finite resource of the bandwidth that allows people on TV, women and minorities were not allowed to even be at the table. Time after time, when generational wealth has been created in this country, women and minorities were not allowed to compete and contribute and bring forth their particular genius. And we now have a situation, the reason why this is such an important gathering is because I know we have a serious problem in the financial sector. from, when you look at Silicon Valley and who the Sand Hill Road, the investment firms who they're investing in, such a small amount of that, those investments, those funds are investing in minorities. And how many examples do I have to show you that minorities in this country produce tremendous amounts of wealth, but they're not receiving the VC dollars? When you look at our financial firms, I just gave you the data and the genius of some of these managers. But the decisions being made in the financial world, small business loans, when we have African American women being some of the greatest entrepreneurs right now, not getting small business loans at a rate that's necessary. And so as we continue to create wealth in this country, trust me, I know this from looking at the endowments of universities I went to. Financial firms compete vigorously to have this money invested in their funds. Why? Not just because they think they have great ideas where to invest it, it's because it creates incredible wealth. And if we don't start creating diversity in the financial sector, that's not going to continue to flow through the system so that we create not just a more representative, diverse, inclusive country. I like inclusion, but that's not the end that we're seeking. The end that we're seeking is to making sure that our nation benefits from the incredible capacity we have that is not right now being accessed. So this conversation we're about to have, two panels, please understand, it goes to the core of our country's purpose, and it goes to the core of our ideals and our potential to manifest greatness in humanity. And so that's why we need soldiers. That's why we need folk that are indefatigable. That's why we need folks that understand in this complex economy of ours, you gotta be out there on the streets fighting against mass incarceration, which we know the system of mass incarceration, what does that have to do with economics? Well, Vanderbilt, I think it was university, came out with a study, we'd have 20% less poverty in America if we weren't hyper-incarcerating our own people. Your earning potential goes dramatically down when you get arrested for doing things that two of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing. Everything is affecting economic earnings, from housing policy to criminal justice policy to education policy. This all feeds into this larger picture in our country. And that's why I'm proud that in his busy schedule, with incredible demands, that he's come to speak to this core that is discordant with our beliefs. That he's not only out there fighting on issues that are the core of our country's attention, but he also understands that what's happening in the boardrooms and the back rooms, what's happening in the C-suites, is critically important to this larger agenda. I have been so grateful for this man's leadership, for his friendship, and for his counsel, his personal counsel to me as I'm trying to manifest leadership that is worthy of the opportunities of people from New Jersey and the country that 50. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you the Reverend ALC.
But I'm very, very happy that Senator Booker co-sponsored this, because this is a real serious problem in our country and in our community. Several years ago, he referred to Brian Mathis and some others, sat down and began showing me the real color divide when it comes to pension fund management and when it comes to other areas of financial management. And we took it upon ourselves, the National Action Network, to say we wanted to fight this as a civil rights issue. Politics without protecting economic interests just becomes a civil exercise. Most people in politics are there for economic interests. And we need to make sure that our political leadership protects protects the financial and the interest, the financial interests of our community. Why do I say that? I'm saying that we're not, Senator Booker and others are there for a manager, but we want managers to have the right to deal with money so they can invest in our community. One of the things that I've said as we move around the country, everybody says we're now being gentrified. That's one issue. What is even more alarming to me, Senator Booker, is when I go and find out that developers are getting their money from financial managers who are managing our pension funds to remove us out of the neighborhood. I mean, we're actually subsidizing our own removal. I've met with union leaders that have 70–80% Black and Latino membership, and nobody managing their funds of color. So grandma's been a member of the union 40 years, paid her dues, into the pension, but grandma's grandchild, even if they came towards school of finance, can't manage grandma's money. And make it even worse, Person X can go and get the management of that money and buy grandma's house from under her, build condos. Like they're brilliant. I mean, there's nothing brilliant about what they're doing. People sitting out in the street, in Harlem, on sidewalk cafes, drinking Mentos, on the same streets that we always had restaurants and you couldn't get a bank loan. But they're getting money from asset managers that we don't have access to. But we gonna bust that up with somebody like Senator Booker inside. Senator Booker and others inside, and those of us and others outside. Like we one house gets all the money dealing with railroads. I mean, we're going to go into that all this afternoon. No bid. I mean, this is criminal. Now, on the other side, we have a good example. The city controller of New York spoke in National Network Weekly Rally last Saturday, and is challenging corporations to tell them the diversity on the boards and that you can't deal with it unless you answer that. These are issues that we're going to raise, not only from a demonstration that we're going to do that and have began, but we're going to make it a campaign issue for the midterm elections. So when people come to get our votes in our churches, in our civic centers and all, we're going to ask, what are their positions in terms of how we spend municipal, state, and federal money in terms of investment? We never asked that. I remember in 1995, we had a meeting in 95 with the state controller of New York, who was at that time Alan Ellis. Controlling New York, they give you financial services. The state controller of New York is the sole decider of where the money goes. And a bunch of ministers and I had jumped on Alan Ellis about some issue. He met with us, about 10 of us in the room, activists and preachers. And he says, well, we went through the issue, resolved whatever we angry about. He said, anything else we need to talk about? And one of the ministers said, yes, so you're going to support us in the $1 Million March. I said, I don't care if he supports the $1 Million March. He's got billions of dollars in investment funds. What do we care if he comes? And my point is, we don't even know what to ask for. We let folks come to our churches, come to our community centers, our gatherings, get our vote on the cheap. We almost time to put in our church, go to choir singing, come in, sing a little Amazing Grace, go out the door. No, we got to ask you about something. Y'all got X amount of millions of dollars in public funds. Why aren't we managing it? If we're 20% of the city, we ought to be investing at least 5 to 10% of the money. It's our money. We're the taxpayers. You're talking about our money. And the more our people understand this, the more they will not be talked to like we are not at least as stupid with our own money. The most insulting thing to me is when right-wingers tell us, why don't y'all lift yourself up? Well, if you quit taking our money, giving it to your cousin, we could lift ourselves up. You're taking our money. Why don't you do something to help yourself? We do. We pay our taxes. And you take our tax dollars and invest it with your nephew. So I'm glad you brought that up, because we about to bust that up, because your nephew had to get in line now with those of us in the financial services. That's so we were serious. We hired in National Action Network that works on this full-time, Blair Smith, who used to work at the state controller's office. And now heads this area for us, and we've already been to California, other places. And Blair's going to host, and he's on full-time in our corporate office. I do not believe in people doing things in areas that they're not guided with expertise. He knows nothing about preaching. I know nothing about preaching. So everybody stay in their lane, we get something done. I also want to acknowledge the head of our Washington, D.C. office, Bureau Ebony Riley, whose birthday is today. Organizers, they will be the ones marching outside the places they can organize that. Brandon Hicks and Isabel, raise your hand. Glad to have them. Reverend Paul. Northeast region for National Action Network, Stan Minister Kirsten Ford. And the head of our national membership, my oldest daughter, Dominique, my oldest child. I only have two daughters. October. Another month. So I want to bring Blair on, who will bring on the first panel, but I want you to know we are solidly committed with everything we have. We're going to partner with Senator Booker to make sure that we deal with this legislatively as well as in terms of those that do direct action. We think that we've got to hit them from all angles. We understand marching doesn't solve all the problems, but it brings attention to the problem. A lot of people talk about, I don't know why we march, what do we get out of marching? Marching is not designed to solve problems. Marching is designed to expose the problem. But if it's not exposed, no one has the impetus to do something about it. So we understand when we're marching that we're embarrassing somebody, so somebody got to do something about it. Most folks that say, I'm giving up marching, never march. I ain't marching no more. What's the last march you did? It's like me saying, I'm giving up ice skating. The purpose of marching is to raise attention. If we put marches, we put 1,000 people, Isabel and Brandon organized, put 1,000 people in front of Black Rock. Somebody then got to ask, how did they get all this money? And like I said, I don't know anything about all that. I met one of the CEOs the other week, and he said, let me explain to you. No, I went to public schools, but you can't explain it. We'll be outside. We'll be until you can explain the branding to them why this makes sense. But we be outside. You know, I'm going to weight thing, I need to exercise, and we going to be just marching. All that you making as an explanation don't make sense to me. All I know is you got all the money, we got none. It's basic to me. And if you sit up there and let people rationalize you being excluded, then there's something wrong with you. There is no explanation for that. And that's how we've got to deal with this. So Blair's going to introduce our panel. I hope we can formulate a real, first get the information so we can do something about it, but we're committed to it. If you see the senator have to step out because he's got several things he's got to do, but he wanted to kick this off. I've got to do my radio show and slip out, but we wanted to set the tone, and Blair Smith will guide us through the afternoon. I also must say to Senator Booker, who's a member of Metropolitan Baptist Church in New York, who's pastor and board member of National Action Network, that I don't feed in a lot of rumors and all, but the last person that I saw hug Brian What's the final?
Let's have another hand for Reverend Sharp. They've set the tone for this afternoon for why we are here, and I'm going to ask our distinguished panel if they would please ascend the stage so we can keep the program moving. And while they're coming up, I just wanted to share an experience that I had on the train ride down here from New York City. I grew up not too far from here, down Route 50 in Annapolis. Went to school, decided to go up to New York and hang out with Reverend Sharpton. But sitting on the train next to me was an older woman, and somehow we began a conversation, and she is a New York City police officer. She's a sister. She had her hair, her braids pulled back, and we began talking, and I told her about this day and what I was doing and working with Reverend Sharpton, and she was very pleased. And I said to her, I said, well, how would you feel if you knew that people that did not look like us were not allowed the opportunity to help you protect your pension fund money? And she said, you know, I'm retiring in January. And she held her head down when she heard that news. And she said, please ask, you know, the folks in that room to do something about that. Because I would feel better knowing that somebody that looked like me, sounded like me, knew where I came from, was looking out for the money that I worked hard for the last 20 years to make. So that experience really kind of hit all of this home for me. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce our distinguished panel. We appreciate their time in coming down here to talk with us about their experiences. Time and time again, we hear that institutions, public and private pension plans, foundations, university endowments fail to consider diverse and women-owned asset management firms as they make their investment decisions. Across the board, of the $70 trillion managed by U.S. registered asset management firms, aka Wall Street, less than 1% is managed by diverse and women-owned firms. 1%. This panel will bring together legislative leaders, diverse-owned asset management firms, pension plan decision makers, and others in the financial services community. And our goal here today is to identify the key barriers to our progress, highlight some of the recent advances that have been made, and also to explore some of the pathways to scalable action and solutions on both the local, state, and federal levels. On my right, we have Mark Johnson, and I'm going to have to shorten the bios you all sent me are pretty long bios, so I'm going to have to, don't be offended, I'm going to have to cut a few things out. I won't leave the schools out, but I'm going to have to shorten these a little. Mark is the founder of Astra Capital. He is based here in D.C. And Mark, where did you grow up again?
I grew up in Anacostia, Hillcrest area,
All right,
southeast.
we'll get back to that in a second. So Mark has over 20 years of investment experience in the communications and technology sector, and he has deployed over $2 billion in capital on behalf of leading investment firms. Mark was a member of the U.S. buyout fund for Carlyle, also based in D.C., and ultimately served as both a managing director and global partner responsible for leading global efforts in both the wireless and business sectors. And Mark, where did you say you grew up again?
DC.
D.C., all right. Now, Mark received his A.B. in economics from Princeton, right? He came out of Anacostia. All right. And he received his MBA from Harvard Business School. To his right, Troy Dixon is the founder and managing partner, as well as the CIO of Hollis Park Asset Management. Troy has a long and distinguished career. His hometown is Queens, New York, as the name Hollis Park suggests. And Troy, I took some bits that were actually written about you from the internet. I didn't take the bio that your firm sent. Troy founded Hollis Park out of a desire to run his own business and to provide better expertise and value to his clients. Prior to founding Hollis Park, Troy was the head of RMBS trading at Deutsche Bank, leading a team of 70 traders and 100 business staff. Troy is especially proud of the diversity of his Hollis Park firm, and he believes that such diversity is the source of strength, and it allows an organization to be both adaptive and flexible. While many companies pay lip service to the importance of diversity, Troy has both walked the walk and talked the talk. I wrote that about you. Troy graduated from the College of Holy Cross with a BA in economics, and I've always wanted to ask you, what position did you play again?
Free safety.
Free safety, all right. To his right, Howard Saunders is the founder of Aldebross Partners. Howard and I worked together for a time at Citi. He is a managing member and founding partner of Aldebross Partners based out of New York. While at Citi, Mr. Saunders co-led the positioning, negotiation, and transaction structuring of approximately $3.5 billion in divestitures. He holds his MBA from Harvard University and a BS from the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. He's also an adjunct lecturer at Columbia Business School and sits on the boards of the New York City Partnership Foundation and the Riverside Church of New York. It's amazing you have that time and run that firm at the same time. To his right, Nilly Gilbert, you may recognize as a frequent correspondent on CNBC. Nilly is the co-founder and portfolio manager of Maturin Capital, managing hedge funds and long-only equity strategies. To my knowledge and my experience working both with the State Controller's Office and with Reverend Sharpton, and in my past experience on Wall Street, she may be the only sister that I know who is a founding partner in a hedge fund, unless I'm mistaken, in this country. Her firm has been recognized with multiple awards as an investment performance leader, and its research is often cited in the Wall Street Journal. She received her BA from Harvard University, graduating magna cum laude, and has a special concentration in economics and social studies. Her MBA in finance is from Columbia Business School, which I also hear is a great school. Nilly has been honored by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader, by 100 Women in Hedge Funds. She has more acronyms after her name than I can cite here today, and she also sits on the investment committee for the David Rockefeller Fund. Tiffany McGee is the partner and managing director of Momentum Advisors. Did I get that right? Both titles? Okay. She texted me and said, make sure you get my title right. Tiffany has worked on Wall Street for over 15 years. She is a partner and head of institutional client services for Momentum, where she oversees fiduciary and investment advisor services for Momentum's corporate and nonprofit clients. Since beginning her career, she's managed over $7 billion in assets for institutional clients. And she holds a bachelor's degree from my alma mater, Morgan State University, which that helped get her on the panel today. And finally, to her right, Robert Ezeki is the founder of Farrell Asset Management. Farrell was founded in 2011 after leading the private equity co-investment business at Parrish, where Robert worked. And he has over 25 years of investment banking and private equity experience. He also serves as a trustee on the Jacob Javits Center in New York, where he was appointed by former governor of the state of New York, Mr. David Paterson. And he is also a graduate of Harvard Business School and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where he won a Division I national championship in men's lacrosse. I did not know that. All right. Go Tar Heels. The reason I took the time to read through our panelists' resumes was not because we wanted to brag or laud over their credentials. Most of them I've gotten to know over the years. They're actually rather shy about their accomplishments, but I wanted to hit home the fact that these are the people who face challenges in trying to invest your money. These are the credentials that these people have that are questioned and scrutinized and say, well, you know, and the most insulting thing that I think that I heard when I worked as a senior investment officer for the state of New York is, well, Blair, don't you think that perhaps they have enough money? And I said, I said it in my head. I think I might have said this out loud in a meeting. I said, has anybody ever asked you if you had enough money? You know, no one would ask anybody that unless they looked or sounded like us. So I wanted to start with Mark, because Mark, he's very passionate about this topic, and we've had some really good conversations about your experience. And I wanted you to sort of give a top-level overview of your experience in trying to raise money here in the States versus raising money abroad. And the only thing I'll ask my panel is we have to keep the acronyms to a minimum. So instead of GP and LP, and you know, it took me 3 years to learn what those acronyms were. We'll keep it to general partner, limited partner, et cetera, for our audience. So, Mark, you go ahead.
Sure. I'll start with the passion, just so there's no suspense around that. I'm very happy to be here and excited that this dialogue is continuing. I think Blair, obviously our distinguished introducers and government officials who are focused on this issue, but to me it's just a very personal one. I think you're right that to ask the question how much money you should make is the wrong way to think about it. But at the end of the day, the decision to found Astra, aside from what I felt was kind of an overwhelming pull in the marketplace, was a very personal decision to leave the larger investment community and make a statement with a firm that I knew could be successful, so that we could add another data point to the board that says, you know, not everybody that founds an investment firm and grows it well has to come from just one background. And I felt a responsibility to do that just because of all the good that had been done for me in my career, and all of the frankly luck and grace that's come my way to have allowed me to get to a global partner and sort of senior position in a major investment firm throughout Wall Street. So this has been a very natural act, but a very personal and passionate experience. The last 3 years of getting Astra going has been great too. There's been a ton of support from a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in this community, which I'm very appreciative of. Our early deals, we were able to work closely with folks that were introductions from, you know, Bob over there at the NAIC, or our friend Rob at the end of the table. So there is a positive momentum because there's a community with a groundswell, but still a lot of work to do. And what I think have recognized most of all is, at the end of the day, allocating capital is about risk appetite and coaching people to specialize in different forms of taking risk with money. And what I found was you had to kind of hit all the different sources, not just the places where perhaps an emerging manager of color might go first for capital. You have to hit the endowment and foundation world a bit. You have to hit high net worth individuals, and even some of the global sovereigns, which, you know, always felt to me like where we would go 2-3 funds from now, because everyone says, you know, you got to build a big business before that. What I ultimately found was great entrepreneurialism in places where investors were given freedom to really dig deep and find how a manager worked, what their real background was, and understand their story, and not sort of, you know, just look at the first page of the elevator pitch. We ended up raising, you know, north of $100 million from an international sovereign wealth fund that supported us in an early deal that went extremely well, and then supported us with a large anchor investment to our fund, which has been great. And we're supplementing that with capital from other sources domestically. But it is interesting that you find in the strangest places the person that will peel back the covers and work closely with you, may not come from the place you'd first expect them to come from. And I think that for future managers in the States that are spinning out and starting new firms, tweaking this business model to allow for more flexibility by those deploying capital to really kind of have a risk appetite that's consistent with these early firms will go a long way. And that's, I guess, the short answer
That's
to
the
my
short
story. No
answer.
acronyms in that.
No
I hope.
acronyms. And Troy, I'm gonna pivot over to you because well, I knew you, quite frankly, before you started Hollis Park, and you were doing all right. So the challenge of starting on your own any business is difficult. Add to that being a person of color, and then the additional layer of you're talking about managing other people's money. Talk about your experience, what drove you to leave Wall Street and to start your own business.
Well, one, I want to say thank you for having me, Blair. This is an important topic. It will continue to be an important topic, and I think Reverend Sharpton talked a little bit about the waterfall effect. As the people on this panel are successful in managing the money that they're supposed to manage, there's a waterfall effect of us reaching back into our communities of where we came from, and the altruism that's intrinsic in sort of being successful. So I think that's the core tenet of what we're working towards. With regard to me, I mean, it's been sort of an interesting last 4 or 5 years for me. My background is I worked at big sell-side shops for a long period of time, ultimately running big businesses at Deutsche Bank, the most profitable business at the firm at the time I was there. And I heard, it's interesting you said something. Somebody said to me, well, there's $3 trillion in the hedge fund space, and we believe there's less than $2 billion being managed by African Americans. And that kind of struck me, and it kind of hit me in a sort of special way, and I said, that's just an astonishing number. And then I started talking to all my friends. I'm like, hey, there's $3 trillion of hedge fund money managed out there. How much is managed by black people? And people were giving me 50 billion and 60 billion, 25 billion, and I said $2 billion. So it's such an astonishing thing. And kind of when I looked at the footprint of African Americans in the hedge fund space, and I looked at my background and my history, I said, if there's somebody that can actually get this accomplished, I've got to be one of them, because I have this huge support network that I've built up over the 20 years of my career, and I need to start to lever that in the right way. And my thought process was not that I wanted to be insanely wealthy. The concept was I wanted to build a path for other people to sort of follow suit. So my hope and goal was, and I've said this in other places, my hope and goal was for Hollis Park to be sort of one of the pioneers in the space, and then for several African American firms in particular follow suit and pass and surpass where Hollis Park has achieved. And that would be a phenomenal legacy for me to lead. I have this funny story. As Blair said, I had a pretty senior job, and I had a pretty good setup as far as a bunch of different things. And I finally decided it was time for me to go out on my own. So I called my former boss, who's one of my biggest supporters, and just an outright really good guy, really thoughtful. And I said, Doug, I finally decided I'm going to go out and start my own fund, and it's time. And much to my surprise, he goes, why would you do that? And it wasn't what I was expecting for him to say. I was expecting him to say, hey, I'm supportive, I'm in, I'm going to give you some money, I'll make a bunch of introductions. And he said, why would you do that? I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, you and your boss have a good relationship, he barely talks to you, you get paid more money than you ever thought humanly possible, you play as much golf as you want, you have a young family, you're able to leave and go to every baseball game, every concert of every play. Why are you leaving? And it really was a sort of a take back for me. It's like, he's made some really good points. But at the end of the day, the passion to lay that groundwork was more imperative. And I'll be very frank with everybody in this room, it's been a tumultuous 3.5 years since, you know, I left the bank and started my own thing, and we're coming up on 3 years, and things are positive, and we've raised money, and we've made money, we've had good returns. But I constantly texted a good friend of mine who's also in the fray with us, Damien DeWin, and I say, if I'm winning, I don't want to see who's losing. But, you know, but the long story of it is, it has to be about passion. It has to be about what the legacy that you leave. It has to be about how this thing's going to move forward and what's your place in that conversation over a period of time. And that's kind of what drives me on a daily basis. And, you know, we won't stop until we get to where we need to go. And this forum, this concept around managing public pension money of people of color and diversity is an important mechanism to make sure that the people on this panel get to where we need to go and move the needle and ultimately give back to our communities like so many others have from other sort of denominations. So that's, I guess, my message.
All right. And so, Howard, I'm going to turn to you because, again, we worked together in the past at City, and you conveyed to me a number of experiences. I know we have to edit some of them, but I wanted you to share with us sort of the experience that you've had similar to Troy's, leaving a Wall Street firm, deciding to go out on your own, and some of the hurdles, you know, and you've told me some remarkable stories, some of the hurdles that you've experienced in trying to be as competitive as your peers.
Well, thank you, Blair. Of course, we were at Citigroup together, and my exit was as a spin out from Citigroup. So I left, took 4 people with me, eventually grew to a team of 10 people. And the challenge that we had was spinning out of Citigroup did not allow us to have an established track record and to show that to new investors. So we had to not only establish ourselves as a participant in the market. I operated on the investment side of the business with Citigroup's $13 billion pension fund, and then divested assets to comply with the Volcker rule. So I didn't know a single investor. So I had to develop that network of investors and really figure out how to raise money.
And when you say track record, that's basically your resume in your experience.
Yeah, that's your investment returns, how much risk you're taking on to provide those investment returns. And I'm in a somewhat different area. I don't invest directly in private equity, but I'm in a somewhat arcane strategy called secondaries. The secondary is probably one of the fastest growing areas in asset management right now. In total, secondary funds, if you go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, they managed about $2 to $3 billion. Now there are single funds being raised for $10 billion. The whole industry has about $200 billion under management. So I'm a small part of that industry, but I think that's really a point that we need to stress. In every area of asset management, we need a participant. We need a woman firm, a minority firm, a black firm, a Latino fund. And that will allow allocators. I'm also the chair of an investment committee at a small endowment. And Melody's in the audience. We were with, I'll mention the firm, AllianceBernstein, for 20 years. And no one ever investigated their team. What was the composition of the team? How many minority? And this is really one of the biggest social activist churches in the country. And we just never asked that question in that direction. So when Lisa Hines, who many of you know, took over the investment committee, we started to ask those questions. And we very quickly switched from AllianceBernstein to Brightwood. Those are the type of switches that need to happen. You know, the consultants push back on me as well. They say, you know, at some point, Howard, you have to stop looking at diversity and you have to just look at performance.
They're telling you that.
Yes. And no, we're not going to stop looking at diversity. So, you know, when it was initially approved, our program, we had an emerging manager program that targeted 30% of our very small endowment.
Okay.
And
That's a big number, 30%, compared to some of the
well, the
public and
composition,
private
it's
pension
very much
plans,
like
yeah.
the pension funds. The composition of our church is 80 to 90% black. And, you know, the rest is mostly Latino and white. So But the social justice agenda is fairly big for us. And, you know, once we really started looking into it, we said, how can we legitimately not take this as our primary number? Because the numbers are better on the performance side. Some funds have up years, some have down years. So the first thing we look at is, what is the team like? And is it a diverse team? Are there African Americans, Latinos, women represented on the investment teams, not only on you know, the support staff? And I think that's what more pension funds need to do. That's where we really need not only pension funds, but Prudential. You know, help at Prudential would really be helpful to say, how many of your investment professionals are Black, Latino, women?
So we're talking about job creation as well as wealth creation.
Job creation, wealth creation, because that's what creates the pipeline for Troy, me, and others that are on the panel.
And the
is
pipeline
having
for
those
others,
young-
the lawyers, the contractors who are people of color to
Sure.
have the chance to
to go
participate.
out and start firms in some of these smaller areas, and you know, not necessarily in the direct activist, you know, hedge funds and the very large strategies, but in the smaller strategies like secondaries.
Okay. So that I want to pass the baton over to Nilly Gilbert, and I have to tell a funny story about just how cool and down to earth Nilly is. So we were going to meet for lunch one day, and she said, "Well, what do you want? Italian, Chinese?" I said, "You know, I want a cheeseburger." She's like, "Oh, okay." She's like, "I know a place." So I'm thinking, you know, they're going to Five Guys or something like that, or you know, maybe there's McDonald's in Midtown. She took me to the Harvard Club for a cheeseburger. Okay, and I upgraded. I got the poach. She talked me into Poach Simon, but it just she has that type of down to earth personality and spirit, and then juxtapose that to what you deal with when you're doing your thing on CNBC and as a correspondent, or and I've seen you up against like 6 white guys. And I mean, they're all, you know, if your boss has CNBC on in his office and see the ticker going by, or you ever have the chance to flip through the channel and see her at lunchtime, I mean, they're going at it. They're hammering away, question after question about, you know, how she invests and why did you invest that way, and you hold your own. I mean, you hold your own and you give them a moment of pause. I've seen you flip it back to them and ask them a question. They kind of get like a deer in the headlights, and it's kind of like, I can't believe the sister's asked me this question. It's like, boy, I really kind of put my foot in it. So I wanted you to talk about that experience as well as the experience of 99.9% of the time being the only person that looks like you in the room.
So thank you for your very kind words, and I also want to say thank you so much to our hosts for organizing and having us here. It's really a huge honor for me to be here and to be part of this important conversation. You know, when I'm on CNBC, one of the things that really gives me strength is that it's this type of representation is actually part of our theory of change at Matarin for the industry. We really believe that representation of people of color and women who are in these roles has the potential to inspire others to join. So when I'm sitting there and the guys are giving me a hard time, I just know that my folks are out there watching, and it gives me so much strength. I gotta tell you, when I step off the set and I finally get the chance to look at my phone, usually it's exploded. And usually it's us, it's our folks who are writing to me. Some are older people, and they remember a time when you just didn't see many of us on TV at all. Sometimes it's people who work for the companies that I'm talking about, and they say, you know, I just can't believe that I saw you up there and you said my company was good. sometimes it's in beneficiaries of our work. Sometimes it'll be a public worker from California, and I'm so excited to tell them, guess what? We're actually looking after your pension. But the most exciting calls that I get are from young people who are thinking about joining the industry, and they say, I just couldn't believe that you were up there, and would you mind taking a call with me to tell me how you did this? Another thing about the theory of change for the industry has to do with communication. I first learned how to do how to communicate about my work most strongly from my grandmother. My grandmother was a teacher before she retired in the state of New Jersey, so receiving her New Jersey pension. And she used to say to me, I started doing this work when I was 23 years old. She said to me, first of all, are these our kind of people? Is this our kind of thing? And second of all, what the heck do you do? I can't understand it. Can you find a way to explain it to me in a way that I can understand? So often you'll find people in our seats who, maybe haven't come from that kind of background or those kinds of communities, or had to find a way to talk to real people about this kind of work or what it is. So today, the most common compliment that I get when I do communications is, wow, I could actually understand what you said. Thank you for that. And that's all Nanny. That's all my grandmother.
Well, she did a fantastic job.
But this matters for outcomes. I want to say one last thing. It matters for outcomes because at the end of the day, this is a business of trust. If people who are hiring managers, people who we're working for, see people across the table who look like them, who can communicate to them in a way that they understand, it helps them to have deeper trust, which supports long-term decision-making, which is so important in winning in investments, because one of the greatest headwinds for successful investment is just the emotion, the fear and the greed, and so if we can have diversity in the service providers, I think that we can support better decision-making on the other side of the table and better results.
Right. And so, and thank you, Nellie, because obviously your grandmother did a fantastic job.
Thank you. She was a teacher.
There you go. I need to meet her. Maybe she can help me out with a few things. So Tiffany, when I talk to you, you operate in a different space a little bit, but a space that is near and dear to 90% of the folks here. You operate in the defined contribution space. Everybody in here knows what a 401k is, how much proper investment and fiduciary responsibility over that is essential. And we've had some really interesting conversations about what's happening in that space with regard to litigation. And so I was hoping that you could talk about that for a few minutes a little bit.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. So, yes, I was going to give an explanation of a defined contribution plan, but you kind of did that for me. So, quick show of hands. Who in the room has a 401k or 403b? Raise them high so I can see everybody. Okay. Who in here, if I asked you how much you as an individual are paying for your plan, could give me a figure? Oh, okay, not you. You don't count. So you know how much you're paying? Okay, well, all right. So you guys can't.
Not unexpected, Melanie.
You guys don't have my view, and I was prepared for that. And Neely doesn't count, but about 2 people raised their hands. So the majority of us don't know how much we're paying, and actually, Deloitte did a study on just this, and most people in our country think that their retirement plan through their employer, their 401k or their 403b is free. So that's not the case for anybody. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of background, right? So I'm not going to assume that everyone in here is in the investment industry, or certainly in the retirement industry, but in the law that governs retirement plans is called ERISA. And so in 2012, just a few years ago, new regulations came about that said every employer, right, who has a plan for their defined contribution plan, right, 401k, 403b, for their employees, and every vendor, right, so where the plan is held, and administrators and everyone to do that plan, you have to disclose all fees to participants, right, to you guys. But I just asked the question, who in here knows how much you're paying, right? So, you know, what we're finally seeing 4-ish years later is the shakeout of all those regulations, right? Because prior to 2012, this hasn't been done before. I mean, can you imagine? You probably know how much everything costs in your household, how much you're paying for every single service. But prior to 2012, you had no idea how much your retirement plan was costing you, right? So now they had to do that. They had to disclose that. So what we're seeing in the past 6 to 8 months is, and I'll talk about the nonprofit sector because we are in DC. So we're seeing institutions like Stanford, like Yale, like not Harvard, like UVA, like Columbia, like Johns Hopkins, like NYU. I'm naming some pretty, reputable, to say the least, organizations. They're all being sued by participants, and participants are winning. And so, you're probably thinking that, these institutions should have all the resources to be able to, handle this stuff, and they do. But again, this is the first time this has ever been done, right? And so what the lawsuits are surrounding mostly is called excessive fees, right? And so what that tells us is that it wasn't just simple, right, as just saying to a participant, you're paying this amount of money for your plan. It's not that simple. And so I'm gonna try to not get too technical, but when you talk about the cost of a retirement plan, there are different levels, right? So you're talking about the record keeper. Record keeper is who holds the plan and does the daily record keeping. So that's your TIAA, your Fidelity, sometimes Vanguard, Mass Mutual, there are a ton. Then you have your administrator, sometimes a third party who does administrative work. It's a whole long list, right? And then sometimes you have an investment advisor. That's where I come in. That's what I do. Who's going to charge a separate fee. But then you also have the fees of the underlying investments, right? And so those are all the asset managers that we're talking about. So your funds, and I'm just going to, throw out some big ones, right? So American Funds, Goldman Sachs, blah, blah, blah. So you can even get a little bit more granular, and here's where the lawsuits are coming about, is really primarily with regard to the investment funds and the fees. So you've got what's called an expense ratio, right? That's the cost of the fund, and part of that goes to the asset manager, right? They do a good job, they should get paid. But then a lot of times there's a little bit left over, and that's called revenue sharing, right? So what is revenue sharing? So sometimes that can be, that's used to go back to the record keeper, the person, so I'm just gonna, Fidelity, TIAA, to cover the cost of the plan. So, okay, all right, so how much revenue share? Well, everybody's got a different arrangement. So TIAA has 5,000 funds in their platform, there are 5,000 different arrangements. And one mutual fund can have what's called 5 different share classes. That means the same mutual fund has 5 different fees, 5 different versions of a fee. Well, which one do you choose? Better yet, which one has your employer chosen to put on your platform? The one that pays 1.2, the one that's charging you 1.2%, or the one that's charging you 0.5%, 50 basis points? You have no clue. I see a whole bunch of eyes glassed over. So that's the weeds of it, right? And so that's part of what my firm does. Clearly, we are a minority-owned firm based in New York, and to my knowledge, we are the only shop who has a 100% focus on defined contribution plans in the market. So yes, I manage assets, right? So I hire I hire asset managers for all of these different asset classes, but I'm also managing compliance, because I can do a fabulous job at building a fund lineup and hiring great people, but I also have to be fee conscious, because what the 2012 regulations further said is not just that you have to disclose the fee, but you also have to have a prudent process for selecting funds in the platform. You have to have a process for managing those funds, right? Excuse me, for monitoring those funds. You have to be fee conscious. Are your fees reasonable? Well, how do you tell if your fees are reasonable, right? So the majority of this falls on HR, right? So I don't know if you guys have a good relationship with your HR department. Does the head of HR have a background in investments, right? So this
I
is
heard
how.
somebody say no out there.
Right. I didn't say it. I didn't say it. But, you'd be surprised. My clients are very large institutions, a lot of them in DC. Very large. You know most of them. The HR department consists of, if we're lucky, 3 people. 3, right? And these are people with millions, I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in a retirement platform. And who kind of oversees that is the CFO. And the CFO may know a little bit about investments, but he or she, let's just be honest, usually it's a he, is really kind of managing all the finances of the whole organization. So that's where the issue is. So it's not that these large institutions are doing anything wrong, right? So no one's purposely, setting out to do something malicious.
Nobody's evil. Right?
Nobody's evil. It's just they didn't know. And you say, well, how do they not know? These regulations came about. Well, yeah, it's like 72 pages long. No one read it. I did. But I do that for fun because that's what I like to do. I'm single, so I have time on Friday night.
All right.
Right.
Before we get too deep in the weeds
Right.
on that, I want to make sure that we give Rob sufficient amount of time for his
There we go.
presentation.
So that's basically the whole deal with that.
All right. So Tiffany, thank you. So Tiffany, for quite some time, she reached out to me and she said, listen, you all are doing this panel in DC. This is an issue that is going to be top of mind for most of the folks in this audience, and I'm very glad that you reached out to me and that we made sure that we got you up here today. So with that, Rob, I'm going to pivot to you. You're going to be our wrap-up man. So Rob, one of the things that when we started working together over 3 years ago that I was impressed with by your business, and you do a co-invest private equity platform, so you co-invest in businesses. The first time that you sent me a report, it was the list of companies that you invest in. And I was just like, oh, this is a little different. This isn't, a list of stocks or bonds. This is the actual companies that you all put money into. And I want to say this, I want to go on record publicly in saying that I am so glad that we wrote a check for Cushiony Ox. I just want to say that those ladies, what the brand is out there, I wasn't as familiar with it, but I'm very, very glad that we did that and that we helped an African-American sister, get her business off the ground, and that was good work that we did back then. So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk a little further about that job creation, business creation model, because it's unique and interesting, and I think the folks here want to hear more about it.
Well, thank you, Blair. Well, we're going to talk about that brand, and but first, I'm going to talk about how we got there. And the way we got there was because of organizations like this, and because of the fine work that the Senator Booker's doing and the Reverend Sharpton. It's work very similar to what's happening here and the kind of work that you guys are going to do that allowed this investment opportunity to happen. And what do I mean by that? Back in 2007, there was a similar effort happening in New York City. It was led by CUP, it was led by NAIC, NASP, and it was to bring equity to investing in the state of New York for all the reasons that were mentioned earlier. And so fortunately, we had a comptroller like Mr. DiNapoli, Comptroller DiNapoli, who really believes in these issues, but there was also a lot of good political pressure. So it was a nice confluence of things that came together. And so what ended up happening is that he made a commitment, right, as the sole trustee in the state of New York to diversify the management of that fund. Right, and it's $180 billion, and he made a commitment that up to 10 or 15% of that will be managed by either women or minorities, okay? And so that would not have happened without the grassroots support and the kind of work that's being done here and what you guys are doing and what the National Action Network is doing. And so as a fruit of all of that labor, I was lucky enough to receive some money as part of that process. And so in 2012, I was allocated $250 million to invest, okay? And we called it the Pioneer Fund because we believe that, listen, if we are successful, it's gonna be a big deal. And it's gonna hopefully be a template, you know, throughout the country. And so we were provided $250 million to invest, as Blair mentioned, to create wealth within our communities, and particularly to invest with minority and women, right? And really two categories. The first category are people like Mark Johnson and people like Troy Dixon, who have just outstanding, you heard the resumes, you heard the experience, right? But when they want to leave that track to become entrepreneurs and start their own businesses or buy companies, it's extraordinarily difficult to do so. Why? Because there isn't capital. And so part of what the comptroller gave to us was the $250 million to provide capital to support those kind of folks. And so we've been very fortunate to be able to invest in experienced, talented investors who found a company to buy. It could be a software business, it could be a manufacturing business, it could be all types of businesses. We were fortunate enough to be able to invest in those businesses and give them an opportunity to build their track record, which is one of the terms that we talked about earlier. So that's you know, one thing that we've done. The other thing is we've backed a good number of women. And one of the groups that we backed were two designers, number one and number two at Parsons, in their 30s. You know, one is Jamaican from the UK, another one is Filipino from DC, and they have a wonderful aesthetic. They're artists, and they started their business in 2008. You know, Cushnie and Ox, and they got wonderful distribution. Bergdorf, Neiman, Saks, you know, and we put some money behind them because, you know, we believed in them. You know, they were small, they didn't have many people in their firm, but they had that kind of twinkle in their eye to just that you believe that they could do big things. And so we made that investment, and it comes full circle to what you just mentioned. Who saw Michelle, our beautiful First Lady, at the ESPYs, you know, in that beautiful black dress? That was a Cushnie and Ox dress. And so it broke the internet, they said. And it is a beautiful dress.
So
and
black designer for the black First Lady.
Indeed, indeed. And so now we've taken that business, which really was just beautiful cutout dresses. Hopefully you guys saw that dress. And now we've expanded their product assortment. We opened up e-commerce. We just rolled out shoes and handbags. In fact, last week, we had a fashion show, Fashion Week in New York City, and it was their very first fashion show where they were head to toe their product. And that would not have happened without capital. So that's a direct link between the work that you guys are doing and actually empowering entrepreneurs to make their dreams happen. So the work that's being done here is really important.
All
Thank you.
right. So we're cutting a little bit into our second panel, our fireside chat, but I did want to ask the panelists, and you all can speak up in tandem in responding to this question. We do have representatives from state, local, municipal outlets here. And I'll start with the, to my far right. What can these plans be doing better from your vantage point, from where you all are sitting, in order to increase opportunities for minority business? And I'm gonna have to hold you guys to 30-second, 1-minute answers.
You ask me?
You can start with you.
Yeah, you know, I think it's just being bold. I mean, I think it's clear that this money, it's our money. We're the beneficiaries, and women and minorities. The talent is clearly there. The training is there. The statistics are there that emerging managers and minorities outperform. So we need people in those seats to just be bold. And so I'm just going to keep it real simple. It's just that's what it's all about. And I think organizations like you know, the National Action Network and the senators and the political will, I think, hopefully push people to be bolder. But there's no reason why there shouldn't be more capital flowing to us.
Tiffany?
So I'm excited because in my space, you guys have a ton of power. There is so much money. Entities are making so much money off defined contribution plans. It's not even funny. I mean, it's crazy, stupid, insane money. And so the thing that we, and I say we because I'm part of that, right? I'm not making crazy, insane, stupid money, but I'm part of that. And that we clamor for, right, that we really want the most is to find out what participants need, what they want, and how best to serve them. Because if we can provide a solution first, then that works for our business, right? So I would love to hire minority and women-owned asset managers, but they have to be on the platforms that I work with, right? So your TIAs, your Fidelities, that kind of stuff. So I would encourage you to, on Monday when you go to work, go into HR and ask them how many of these funds on our platform are managed by women-owned firms, by minority-owned firms. And so I will tell you that all of my plan sponsors are very, they want to hear from you. Again, we're talking about maybe 2 people, right, who are working with me to make all the decisions about the plan. And they want to make sure that they're giving you what you need and what you want. So they're going to listen.
Maybe something the president of NAIC might want to take on that challenge at some point. Millie?
In New York, I'm sitting in the seat on the other side of the table as well, on the investment committee of a foundation, and also chairing the investment committee of an endowed nonprofit. And in my experience, trying to bring diverse managers on board, obviously first you have to ask the questions, where are the diverse managers? Likely the answer is going to be, we don't have any. You can ask for the advisors to find diverse managers, but in my experience, it may be necessary also to get out there and find some and put forward good manager ideas. And then finally, at the end of the day, I think you have to be willing to vote with your feet. Howard talked about his experience, and we have had to do the same thing with my committees. In order to make a difference at the end of the day, advisors and other decision makers need to know that their assets and their livelihoods are at stake if they're not willing to make a difference in this space.
Yeah, just picking up on Neely's point, a big part of the problem, and if this conference on the broader view is about policy, a big part of the problem is the policy that's in place. So the policy favors large firms like KKR, Blackstone. No one gets in trouble for putting money with BlackRock. But the returns are better for smaller managers. There's a Knight Foundation study that the NAIC sponsored that makes it very clear that minority managers, diverse managers, women managers are underrepresented but outperform in terms of performance. Pension funds, institutional investors, insurance companies, they need to be held responsible for doing the best thing. They need to be held responsible for getting the highest returns. And that means investing with smaller managers. It may require that CalPERS becomes 2 pension funds instead of 1. It may require that Common becomes 3 instead of a $200 billion pension fund because they're not making good decisions at that size. That's really the problem. We can compete with smaller firms as diverse firms, and then the decision becomes very easy. But it's very difficult to deal directly with a large city giving $5 billion to a particular mega private investment firm like a KKR to do with what they want to. That really works against all of us in the macro. And that's a policy issue. That's something we need to attack as a policy issue.
All right. We may cover that in the next panel, just FYI. So.
Yeah, real quickly, I mean, I think the panelists have talked about a lot of topics, but sort of intertwined in that, and it sort of dovetails with how we were just talking about, is really forcing the consultant world, which has been put in place as a protector of public pension money, as a protector, to really force them to move the needle. Quite honestly, I think we've had a lot of talks around, public pensions making this movement around having diverse manager programs, but at the end of the day, they're protected by the consultants who don't allow for that process. So this waterfall has to be checked at each level of that waterfall, and until that happens, there'll be constant stops in our process as we move forward. So if there are people in the room that can kind of help move that cycle along, I think forcing the consultants to be thoughtful and dynamic around how they choose the managers that are acceptable on their platform will do a lot in moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think everyone's sort of echoing the same points. Another way to think about it, though, might be that maybe the public pension community is being asked to do too much, right? You've got, lots of great people with good intentions dealing with relatively, large institutions with very low risk return profiles. The thoughts around pooling capital into other vehicles that can have a stronger risk appetite, right? People want to start a tech company, they go to a tech VC. They don't go to the state of New York, right? Right. And so you need to, I think, perhaps invest in allocating capital to different places where a mandate to be creative is facilitated. And, smaller funds, funds that don't necessarily fit that typical box of the multi-billion-dollar firm like a KKR yet, can know that that's a place to go to be entrepreneurial. So, maybe we're asking, the legislators to, find a different model too.
Okay. Well, let's give our panel a round of applause. And not only do I personally appreciate your time and coming down here today to speak with us, but I think we all benefited from your expertise and your guidance, and we've got some takeaways that we're going to pass on to the next panel. So thank you all again very much. And this panel is going to be much more interactive between the panelists. We're going to give them the opportunity to talk to each other. I'll do some brief introductions, and again, we had to shorten some of these bios, so please forgive me if we leave anything out. And then my distinguished co-moderator, Wendy Garcia, will tell you all about herself and what she's doing. So on the end, we have Bob Green. Bob is the president and CEO of the National Association of Investment Companies. NAIC is the industry association representing diverse-owned private equity firms and hedge funds, many of which rank among the highest performing funds in the nation. Bob is responsible for leading all facets of the association's policy, advocacy, capital, performance research, member services, and strategic alliance development. Bob is the former chair of the Board of Trustees for the Virginia Retirement System, a $72 billion public pension plan. The Virginia Retirement System administers a defined benefit plan, group life insurance plan, deferred comp plan, and a variety of other retirement benefits for over 600,000 state employees. So, Bob, if Tiffany's here, she's probably going to tackle you on the way out. Brian Mathis, before I begin, I just want to say one thing. I want to say that a big part of why we're able to be here today and put all of this together is because of Brian Mathis, because of Brian's leadership throughout the years. I find Brian not only to be a good friend, but also a mentor, a sponsor, an advocate. And I realize that I would not be standing up here today if it were not for you. And I've never had the chance to say that to you publicly, and I just wanted to do that today. In addition to all that, he is also the founding partner of Pine Street Asset Management. Prior to Pine Street, he was a director of the Pacific Alternative Asset Management Company, a fund of hedge funds with over $7.5 billion in assets under management. Sounds like a guy who knows what he's doing. At PAMCO, he was a member of the investment committee, evaluating directorial hedge fund strategies, portfolio asset allocation, and guiding strategic investments initiatives for the firm, including establishing PAMCO's London office. His career began in politics as an appointee for President William Jefferson Clinton at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and he is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He received his JD from Harvard Law, so if anybody does a slip and fall, this is the guy to call. His MPA from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and also his BBA from the University of Michigan's Business School. Go blue. Go blue, all right. And to his left, Melanie Rollins. So Melanie is both the partner and head of client services and business development for Brightwood Capital. Melody also serves on Brightwood's executive committee. In her role, she oversees all of Brightwood's existing and prospective client and consultant relationships. Outside of work, Melody is very active in the community, focusing on organizations and programs that are eliminating the disparities in access to educational, legal, and health resources for underserved communities. Toward that end, she currently serves on the Board of Regents at Georgetown, as well as the Board of Trustees of the New York Academy of Medicine, Coro, New York, and the Neighborhood Defenders Service of Harlem. She earned her MBA with a focus on financial engineering at MIT, and a BS in economics from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. So you went to Georgetown, and now you sit on their board. All right. In addition, Melody holds both a CFA and a CAIA, and again, more letters and acronyms after your name than we have time to list. Yeah. And finally, we have Wendy Garcia. Wendy is the Chief Diversity Officer for the City of New York. Ooh, your boss would kill me if you didn't say that. Working with the City of New York Comptroller, Scott Stringer, and she is my co-moderator here today. So I'm going to let Wendy, well, not let Wendy, but she's going to say a few words, and then we'll get the conversation started, and we'll let you all take it from there. So.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Blair. None of us could be here without all your hard work these last couple of weeks. I know it's a hard job. Give Blair a round of applause. So good afternoon. We're going to make this a little lively. I want to thank you all for being here. Many of you have traveled, some of you from Baltimore, some of you from California, maybe some of you just from down the street, but we're all here today, and it's going to be an exciting time. My name is Wendy Garcia. I am the Chief Diversity Officer for New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, and your moderator today. Before I begin, I want to do a special thank you specifically for Reverend Al Sharpton. He has been a tremendous partner and tremendous advisor to the Comptroller, and he has been absolutely fearless. So even though he's not here, we want to give him a round of applause for really pushing the agenda on this. And of course, Senator Cory Booker, who has, and he didn't mention this, actually advocated for about $25 million for startups that are impacting MWBs across the nation, and that was our first time, so we should give that a round of applause as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of our office. See, my position as a Chief Diversity Officer was really created by Comptroller Stringer when he came to office about 3 years ago. And I just want to say this and reiterate it again, because there was no Chief Diversity Officer in the Comptroller's office before the Comptroller Stringer created this. And this is really important because this is how we break the mold. This is how the position is really built to function as a watchdog for diversity. And it really does make government take part in all kinds of equity and leveling out the playing field and pushing the agenda at New York City, which at the New York City level. But as you know, New York City really is a trailblazer for the rest of the nation. Today in the room, we know that diversity, it really is not a box to be checked. It's a strategy for economic success. We know that it's a recipe for a fair economy, and we know that it yields better business outcomes. So the question is that we all need to ask ourselves in the room is, how can we get this done? How can we expand opportunities and overcome obstacles? And to enhance MWBEs in the corporate world, what do we need to ask our elected officials, and what do we need to ask ourselves? So that's what we're gonna talk about today. Before we start, I want you to consider a couple numbers. Of S&P 500 companies, 79% of board members are men. 79%. What does that mean? It means that only 21% are women. 90% of these board members are white. I saw a lot of faces. 90% of these board members are white. Just 5% are black and 2% are Hispanic. Those are extraordinary statistics. Even if you start thinking about government contracts and our small businesses in general, in New York City, we put out a report every year that found that $15 billion in government procurement is done all the time, but just 4.8% of that went to women and minority-owned businesses. I'm gonna reiterate, that's 4.8%. There's a pattern here. That means that the benefits of government spending aren't trickling down to the everyday neighborhoods. And when capital is only flowing to non-MWBEs, we know that has an effect, not just in New York City, but across the nation. So the question is, what do we do about it? In our office, in just these last 3 years, our investments with MWBEs are up 26%. It's now one of the highest in the nation. And this month, we announced the Boardroom Accountability Project. We like to call it version 2.0. And we're expecting each company to disclose the background, the skill sets of those that are on their boards, because right now that data is not publicized. It just actually does not exist at all. So we want to know whether diversity is a priority for the companies that we own, and if it isn't, the comptroller has made it very clear, then we want to know why. Because I think that we all need to agree that when we see a change at the top, in the near corporate boardrooms, the rest of our economy will see a change. That is why today we're gonna hear from our wonderful panelists. They will present to us some new ideas on their institutional knowledge, and more importantly, some of the leading experts across the nation on how we can get this job done in a way that is fair. With us today, we have Melody Rollins. Give Melody a round of applause. We already did that. Brian Mathis and Robert Green. We're gonna start off with a question for Mr. Green, and why don't we go ahead and why don't we talk about a little bit about how NAIC and what it does, what people can do, and why this matters.
So, first of all, I want to thank Blair and Wendy for their role in putting this together. This type of undertaking takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of personal connection to get all these people, many of which came from New York. So really want to thank you all for doing this and convening this discussion. I apologize for all my colleagues. We do tend to speak in zeros, billions and millions, and if I were sitting in the audience and I heard people with billions and millions complaining about not having enough money, I might wonder what they were really thinking about. But I say that only in jest because you're talking about a real game that's played in trillions, right? So when you're 1,000th of something, we're not going to do math class today, but when you're 1,000th of something, you're not significant, generally. And that's what, in some cases, with all the talent, the degrees, the experience, our entire industry is but a thimble of the big picture out there. So if you think about we get a lot of our capital that we invest from state pension plans, municipal pension plans, and corporate America. And when you bundle all of those pension plans together and you come up with a number that's close to $40 trillion, to say that you manage $100 million, right? So I do, and I did apologize for all the zeros, but it's a big problem. My organization, the NAIC, we're one of the oldest trade associations in this space. Some of you all read Reggie Lewis's book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? right? And that's still a question we ask today because white guys tend to be having all the fun in this industry. But Reggie Lewis was the general counsel to our organization. He did it for 10 years, and that predated the extraordinary work he did on TLC Beatrice. I say that really for a point of reference. The NAIC is a trade association of diverse-owned private equity firms and hedge funds. And I'm happy to report that those diverse-owned private equity and hedge funds are doing quite well with the capital they have. Within the last 3 years, 15 of those firms have raised 19 oversubscribed funds. Now, when I take that out of finance speak, what does that mean? That means 15 firms set out to achieve a goal, and they did it 19 times over, right? And the way they've done that is because they have had extraordinary performance. Some of the people that you've heard from today, you'll hear from Melody at Brightwood, just extraordinary. Others, you know, Troy Dixon, Hollis Park, and everybody that spoke to you today, just extraordinary firms. But the simple thing, if you got lost in all the zeros and all of the everything else that we talked about, is it's not working. And I'll cut to the point. The reason it's not working is we need more champions. The reason we're having this conversation with the National Action Network and at the CBC is because this is a problem we can't fix. You all have to fix it. The people have to fix it. It's the people's capital. In every place that capital has flowed, and almost every one of the pension plans that we work with, you can trace the DNA of it back to a single person that was not willing to be told no, right? And I'll take you to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois, Senator Emil Jones and his understudy, who later went on to be president of the United States, Senator Barack Obama, caused all of the investment managers, the other trustees, and the staff to come in once a month and raise their hand and testify that they were making better than best efforts. They were doing everything that could possibly be done to get capital into the hands of diverse people. Senator Cory Booker was not mentioned today. In work that we've done with him, Senator Cory Booker wrote a letter to a recalcitrant pension plan run by the federal government, the National Railroad Trust, and demanded that that $30 billion pension plan that refused to talk to anybody or meet with anybody not only deploy capital, but begin doing it immediately. He didn't just sign that letter by himself. He got 8 of his friends in the Senate to sign that letter. That's the level of commitment that it's going to take to break down the wall. So when Reverend Sharpton uses a technical term, we're going to bust that up. That's exactly what we need to happen, but it's going to take the confluence of all my smart friends from Wall Street. It's going to take the elected officials in every house and every legislature in this country, and it's going to take people with T-shirts and signs that flood the lobby and demand it. And if we don't do that, we will be a generation of folks that continue to be, hoodwink, rob, bamboozle, led astray, run amok. I mean, whatever, right, flim flam, the whole game, because you've never seen a more sophisticated game than Hide the Capital. Hide the Capital is actively played in boardrooms and pension funds across this country. I waited 2.5 hours to talk, so I'm now going to continue to talk. But I'll shut up and we'll get to this. Thank you, Wendy. No, because you have a panel of preachers, so I'm going to let it get to you because you got more to say. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Brian, why don't you talk a little bit about what are some solutions and challenges that managers are facing today?
And you can start with challenges first.
Now you preach.
Right. Bob really summed it up because as the previous panel laid out, because once upon a time, he spun the clock back 20 years ago, there weren't as many women or minority-owned managers. And then the whole discussion about track record. How long have you been doing it? Well, are you doing the same thing you were doing at Carlisle? Mark, are you doing that today? And is it exactly the same? And could it be the same if it's not Carlisle? Like suddenly, if you're not there anymore, you got stupid. But as you go back and you look at over the period of time, you spin the clock forward 20 years to where we are today, you have the empirical evidence of the outperformance. The numbers don't lie. And you have the breadth of firms across all the strategies, from private credit, which Brightwood does, to secondaries that Howard was talking about, to co-investment, to structured credit like Troy's doing. Now, do we need more people? We absolutely need more people. And there's pipeline, but who's going to hire the more people? Because I know what the diversity at Troy's firm looks like, or Howard's firm, or anybody else that's up here, or Brightwood. And I can go through the same thing with the Latino firms. People hire people who look like them. And they hire people that know are getting denied other opportunities. And then they spin out of us. Because all these firms, BlackRock, largest asset manager on the planet, spun out of Blackstone. Ares, one of the large private equity and credit funds, spun out of Apollo. People spin out of people all the time, and they get capital from the very same people they had before. But when we spin out, oh, well, you know, I mean, no, you can have a meeting. Well, I don't need a meeting for a meeting. Is this going somewhere? Well, you know, we think it's interesting, but go talk to the consultant. No. If the consultant was going to give us the money, we'd have started talking to them in the first place. You go talk to the consultant and make it clear to the consultant that you want this done. You want to figure out how this can be gotten done. And if there are issues, if I'm coming up short, if Brightwood's coming up short, if Troy's coming up short, tell them what the problem is. We'll fix it. We're all in. Troy got 4 kids. He's all in. If there's a problem, he's going to fix it. If he doesn't, his wife is.
Troy, you may want to move back one row because you're in his line of sight.
Right. No, Howard's hiding back over there. He's like, don't say my name again.
He's right there.
And, you know, to something that Howard and Nilly said, if the consultant cannot figure it out, then fire the consultant and get a new consultant that can figure it out. But as soon as you tell them they're about to get fired, they'll be like, you know, let's just come back to you tomorrow. Because what they couldn't figure out in 4 years, they'll figure out in 24 hours. If it's their money and their family that's gonna go hungry, and if your staff can't figure it out, then fire your staff and get some new staff. Because that's how the game goes. But that's not how it goes when it comes for us. And if you talk to every single person that was in this room that got money, inevitably it ties back to somebody in that pension plan, corporate plan, public plan, that was of color or a woman that put my firm, his firm, their firm on their back and fought all their colleagues inside. I'm getting this done. No, you got a question about that? No, we have the answer. Here it is. And all the places that people got no's, chances are there was nobody inside that looked like any one of us or any one of the people trying to get the money. And sometimes it costs people their job. But then the community looks out and says, you know what, we know what you did. You did the right thing. We'll help you find another job, a better job, someplace else, because there's another plan that does not have their mind right, and we'll send you over there. And that's why elections, I heard the Congressman Cedric say it earlier, elections have consequences. Who gets elected matters. If Cory is not the senator, Senator Booker is not the senator.
Just Cory in here.
Where's the letter coming from?
Right.
The other 8 people in the letter,
Wait. know him.
They're not having that conversation that he and I had before he was a senator. So they're not going to. So if he's not there, where are we? We're nowhere. If Wendy's boss, Comptroller Stringer at the city, he's a friend, and sometimes we're hardest on our friends. But without their leadership, if they can't get it done, how do we go to Texas and get it done? How do we get it done in North Carolina? And we can't agree about everything. But at least we could have a conversation about it, and we could push the needle. And it's not that any single firm is supposed to win, but collectively, people are meant to win. And being able to take the experiences and the anecdotes where our friends in New York City don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could talk about what Bob did at Virginia and say, just do that. Let's talk about how you can get that done. And again, it's all about pressure because we got to get Scott elected. Then we got to hold him accountable because he's not the only one. He has a whole board of people and a whole staff that he inherited. So you have to work with people inside and outside. And you have to have the solution, and you have to have the performance, and you have to have the managers who are going to take time from their day to come up and highlight the issue and stay focused on it, because it's not a win that happens over a day. We were having a conversation with one of our elected friends the other day, and they were like, look, first term, we understand it takes time. Second term, let's go, because this is a generational change. And it takes time, but we're not going to be patient. Pound the table every day and move the needle every day, because it's get big or die. And you have to make the process faster.
Thank you. We're going to move over to Melody.
Your turn, Melody.
We're going to move over to Melody. Melody, why don't you talk a little bit about how firms like Brightwood Capital affect both job creation and wealth creation for entrepreneurs and startups?
Thanks, Wendy. I want to touch on that and what we do, but I also think it's important to, kind of following up on Brian's comments and Bob's comments, to touch on what the city has done for us at Brightwood, meaning what are those steps that make a difference and that help launch a platform like Brightwood, which is important. Brightwood Capital provides debt for growth opportunities to small and medium-sized businesses. It was founded by Damien Dwin and Sengal Selassie, who are not here but send their regards. And really we're focused on partnering with entrepreneurs and middle market companies to build enterprises, to build generational wealth, to create jobs. Collectively, middle market companies are the third largest employer in the United States. So outside of the government and some big corporate American players, middle market companies are where jobs happen. And a lot of these entrepreneurs look like us. We've heard statistics already today about African American women entrepreneurs starting at very small levels who are growing over time into larger companies and the type of companies we support. And so even when they're large, even when they're successful, these are, companies with a couple $100 million of revenue at the top line. They tend to still be connected and care about their community and care about their employees. And so we have funds that are focused on working with these entrepreneurs. We have funds that are focused on minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses, the largest scaled program of its type. This is in partnership with the SBA, with the SBIC platforms. And so we've developed partnerships and relationships over time with entrepreneurs, with middle market companies who are looking to continue to grow their businesses organically. I want to make the point before, because I know we're short on time, that all sounds great. Our founders have extensive experience providing this type of debt capital to businesses. All of the senior team, including myself, has been involved in debt markets and structuring these investments their whole careers. But that doesn't mean we can go and get money from these large pension plans like New York State, like New York City.
or that when we show up on the doorstep, they're ready to give us that money, right? So Brightwood is 8 years old, and we really serve at the pleasure of our largest LPs, who include New York Common Investments, who started, Rob Ezeki mentioned the Pioneer Fund, started with a $15 million investment in Fund 1, became a $100 million investor in Fund 3, and anchored our Fund 4, our current fund, at $300 million. In New York City, who started as a $2.5 million investor in Fund 1, was a $100 million investor in Fund 3, and is a $250 million investor in Fund 4. Those organizations said, they didn't just say yes when we first went to the doorstep. So I wrote a couple of things on the plan, and it was funny. I was writing the list of what it takes to get started in this space. It's everything that New York City did. So first they said no, but here's some feedback, and here's what you need to do to become a type of manager that we can support. Then they said, we have these gatekeepers, we have these consultants. A lot of people mentioned, they may not have taken your call so far, but call them tomorrow and see if they take your call. So they forced consultants to have the conversations. Consultants are unfortunately in a position of being risk averse. They don't want to take risks. It's easier to hire KKR, BlackRock, Blackstone, Ares, because as somebody said earlier, I think Howard, nobody gets fired for hiring those managers. But to understand the pedigree, the background, and the process of an emerging manager is riskier. But when you have a client like New York City saying to their 5 external consultants for each of their 5 underlying plans, no, you're going to do the due diligence on Brightwood, then you have the conversation. And guess what? Some of the first couple were like, whoa, yeah, we're supposed to do what? We're supposed to have what systems, processes in place? Give us 6 months, go back and do that. And so we have relationships with those 5 consultants who also consult to, billions and billions of other dollars because of New York City forcing the conversation. New York State also didn't haggle on fees. In the end, we're just starting. We're trying to build the infrastructure, build a world-class organization. So to undercut me and pay less than what you might pay those big managers is actually perversion of the system, right? But often they'll try to undercut you if you're a small manager and emerging managers. But they didn't do that. They said, we're going to pay you the rack rate if you meet these other hurdles, and which is what they did. And they commit in scale, right? So some of the emerging managers programs will give you $2.5 million. Bob already said, we talk about millions and billions like it's not a lot, but you can't make a lot of money. You can't make any money, for sure, on $2.5 million. And it's harder to scale an organization with just such small dollars. And so they commit in scale, and they commit for the long term, as you've seen the history of New York City and New York Common investing over the life. And then they commit early. So Fund 4 is a fund we're raising. They came in, both New York Common and New York State, as our first investors. So then we go out, we say, we already raised $550 million out of $2 billion. We've already raised that before we even started marketing. So we did that behind the scenes, got that, so that was our first, we've already raised that. That is a powerful signal to the market. So they've used their heft, their reputation to help us move forward. And this is in Fund 4. 8 years later, we have $4 billion under management. This is seemingly emerged, as Damien says, we're an 8-year overnight success story, but it still matters that we have that validation from day one from New York City and New York State. And then the thing about the emerging manager buckets, they can be limiting. The dollar amounts are usually smaller. So allocating out of the main asset class, which is true for us at both New York Common and New York City, or just in the asset class relevant to what we do, and or committing to graduating managers from those emerging manager asset buckets, because that's not a permanent home and that's not a scalable home. So those are things that the city has done for us. We would not be here if it weren't for their commitment, and as Brian just said, in other organizations, because there was somebody that looked like us or otherwise was a very close ally who said, just take the meeting, just give them a chance. Not do them a favor, give away money. Just take the meeting and be really thoughtful. That's why we're in business today.
And I know that we could probably go longer.
Yes.
But I noticed that the folks from Congressional Black Caucus were giving me the high sign out the window. So we may have to wrap things up fairly quickly. So I'd like for you all to give a couple brief remarks, and then
I just want to jump in on something. that Melody just said that's important, and Rob Ezeki said it earlier also. When you fight this hard to get the right people in place, get a Scott Stringer in place, get a Cory Booker in place, get a CIO in place, we have to make sure that our ask is not too small, because the emerging manager program, she's right, that trickle effect, and Mark referenced this also earlier. You give me $5 million, $10 million, you can't build out an institutional quality staff like that. And if I have to go get to $200 million, $10 million at a time, that's a 2 or 3 year exercise. Starving all the way, team starving all the way, you can't build it out that way. When we come in and we make the ask, we have to ask them to be bold, because I think Zeke referenced it. First time fund, his New York State anchored him with $250 million. That's a big deal. Now you can have a full institutional quality staff with $250 million. And what do allocators, what they can't stomach? Investment risk they can live with. Business risk, they cannot live with. If they think you're going away tomorrow, they will never invest with you because they're going to be embarrassed if you go out of business tomorrow. If you have a return issue, that's different. But they mitigate the business risk by going bigger because it makes your firm stronger. And you know, same thing. Our firm, anchored by New York State. First fund, $200 million. That's a big deal. Ray Whiteman at Stellix, they came in with $300 million. First time fund to anchor that. That makes a big difference. Mark was referencing the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but he shouldn't have to go across the ocean when his grandmother's pension money, his uncle's pension money is right here. And you mean to tell me, and I don't know whether it was our Korean friends or our Chinese friends or our friends in the Middle East that gave him the $100 million, but he should be able to get that $100 million anchor right here. Because that's what it takes to build out an institutional quality firm and scale and get the benefits that we want. So if we have to work this hard, and I'm not just talking about the managers, I'm talking about the elected officials, the staff, all of you out there electing these people. If we have to work that hard, we have to ask big so that we have enough money, and then all these benefits of reinvesting, like the anecdote that Melody just gave or that Rob Ezeki gave earlier about the fashion company, we can scale that. Like Rev was also talking about, you know, on the real estate, so that we can build in our own communities.
Thank you,
And we're
Brian.
going to have to, we're going to have to let Bob give the last remarks and then Wendy.
Yeah, no, I think that it has
thank
to
you,
come
Brian.
back to be far more practical. Everybody in this room represents community organizations, churches, places of power and influence in local communities. And we've got to stop focusing on the headline candidate, right? We love to have the governor. We love to have the mayor. When's the last time you invited the CIO to the luncheon, right? When's the last time you had him to the church pulpit to talk about what really matters? If you look at most black churches in capital cities in this country, 60% of the people in the church will be retirees of that municipality or state, right? I'm from Richmond, Virginia. If you go to any black church in Richmond, Virginia, 60% of the people taught school, collected trash, processed licenses, and worked for the universities, right? 60% of the people. But you never see the chief investment officer, the person who is responsible for investing 90% of their non-household wealth. If you take the home asset value out of it, the pension plan is 90% of the wealth in the African-American community. We're focused on the wrong place. So when we talk about all these millions of dollars and we tell you why we're so great to manage it, what we're really saying to you is we're begging for help, right? It is a plea for help. Start talking to the right people, because I can tell you, if the chief investment officer felt that they had to leave Main Street and go to a black church, or go to the Delta's meeting that night, or go to the Links meeting the next morning the way the mayor did, you'd see a whole different behavior set, because there would be a level of accountability that would frighten them into being their best selves. So I'll leave it on that.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to give thank you to our panelists. I want to recognize our first Deputy Comptroller, Elena Gilligo. She's sitting in the front. And Jimmy Yan, who is our special counsel to the CIO. Actually, it's a great point, Bob. It's the reason why Elena and Jimmy and myself are here, because the Comptroller knows that if he cannot be present at this, he has to bring his top staff, and this is an issue that's extremely important to us. We're working on this every single day. We know we have ways to go, and we want to work in partnership with the National Action Network and Bob and everyone here, and Brian at this table, and Melody, to make sure that our pension fund is doing just that and is representing New York City. So thank you again, and thank you to all the panelists. And Blair, great job. Give Blair a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our panel. Thank you all very much for attending. Give yourselves a round of applause and another applause for our panelists.